Hey everybody, welcome. Today we're doing number 27 of Glenn Beck's 40 Days Renewal of Our Commitment to God and to country. And so, like I've said, I'm not affiliated with Glenn Beck. I'm just a guy with a microphone. And if you would do me the favor of liking and subscribing to this channel, then we can continue on. I think they're doing some more extra ones that we'll be doing once Thanksgiving hits. So that will be good. We'll be to continue this. I might do some other pop culture videos in between some of this as we go along. So if you don't want those, just skip over them. But if you want to continue to get the Bible studies, then subscribe and they'll be delivered to you. Okay. So here we go. We're on part 2. We had the Beatitudes part 1 last time. So now we're going on to part 2 with our guest author, Skip Moen. So let's begin. He starts here. Let's begin with the first Beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The Hebrew actually says, and like I had said before, I try and do this, have a Bible that I can look at the words and then, click on them. That's the nice thing about having, a digital, Bible that I use that has the Strong's numbers that you can add into it, and then you can get all the actual words, from the original writing and kind of what those mean, and help you to follow along and get the kind of the actual words instead of somebody else's, hopefully fairly correct, translation. So, okay. So the Hebrew really says the happiest or luckiest people in the world are those who are desperate. The kingdom of heaven came because of them. Okay. In other words, the Beatitude doesn't tell us about getting a blessing. It describes the people who are beggars for God's grace. And it says that because of these people, God brings his kingdom into human life. It's a paradox when we see beggars. We think they're unlucky. We think they are the worst off people. They certainly aren't blessed, but Jesus is saying the kind of thing of desperation is what God is looking for. And when you know that you can't live another day unless someone shows you grace and mercy, then you are close to what God desires. The Beatitude is an upside down thinking. Yes, so I actually a kind of a personal experience kind of story. We have some friends who let their mother stay in their house, who was fairly mentally ill, doing drugs all the time, and they kind of facilitated it by taking care of, buying food and doing these other things. And it wasn't until they moved out of state and left her on her own, just things like, how horrible is that? You just dumped your mother onto the street. Well, she was on the street for very little while, and then just basically hit rock bottom, right? And then was able to get into a mental drug rehabilitation program and help program, and then now is back, has a place to live, and she's on social services for money to be able to afford things, but actually getting back on her feet. She's back in a good church, going to church every Sunday, getting back into the Bible and following God again. So just amazing thing. Like until they threw her out, and she actually had a huge need, right, for God. Then she was able to, turn that around and realize that God was the solution for her life. Even though people had been telling her that, for years. We had been telling her that for many years, and tried to get her to church and everything else. And until she was, flat on her face, basically, things didn't change. So you got to have something that brings that desire, right? Okay, so here we go. There's another part of this first Beatitude that is much deeper when you look at the original language. What does it mean to be poor in spirit? Can you look in the mirror and see yourself as poor in spirit? Does it just mean being humble, polite, kind, or submissive? In the Hebrew, there are 4 different words for poor. One means financially strapped. One means oppressed. One means people at the bottom of the social ladder. But the crucial one, means desperate. The kind of desperation that you can see when someone is starving to death. This is the word Jesus probably used. He wanted to tell us that we need this kind of desperation for God if we're going to see God's kingdom show up. Right? I always say things, I tell people, patience is never learned until it is needed, right? Until it's required. You're never going to learn how to be patient until basically God puts something in front of you that is going to require you to be patient for a very long time. And then you actually learn how to be patient, learn how to rely on God. My wife also has another saying that God is seldom early, but he's never late, right? So, if you're sitting there waiting, why isn't this happening? Why isn't this happening? Why aren't things going? Well, are you relying on God? Are you trusting on God? If you put it in his hands, have you just said, okay, it's off me. I can't do anything else. Let's give it to God. Let's get yourself out of it and make sure that God's in control. And then you're going to, realize that, okay, you can deal with that. You can be patient. You can wait on God, and things will go, typically end up going better, right? Once God follows through, you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that it was going to be so great. Glad I waited, kind of thing. So Jesus is saying that the luckiest people on earth are the ones who are desperately poor, who are beggars for God. What we think are the unfortunate ones are really God's prizes. With this pattern in mind, see if you can discover the paradox in the other Beatitudes. Here are some clues. Blessed are those that mourn is really about what you feel at the funeral of someone you loved. Being at a funeral seems like the most terrible experience you could have, but Jesus is asking you to look deeper. What do you learn about life when you are confronted with death? What spiritual lessons about happiness comes from this? What is the most important thing you learn about life when you're at a funeral? And when you discover that secret, then Jesus says you'll be comforted. What do you think they will be comforted means? Think about the experience. Do you think Jesus is saying that your lost loved one is in heaven now? Is that really comfort to you? What is Jesus saying? Something about your life now at the very moment you realize the truth about life and death. Here's the clue. God will comfort us in heaven, but Jesus is only telling us to hold on. We need to look harder at the backward thinking that Jesus wants us to understand. Jesus looked out on the brokenhearted in the crowd and saw that some were ready, poised to accept the incredible announcement about to be theirs. They were ready because they were no longer able to cope alone. They were indeed the lucky ones. God could reach them. Now in the moment of their raw openness. The rest of us were too preoccupied with our own agendas to know that God had drawn near. And this is very exposed, kind of poignant when you go to a funeral of someone who's a Christian who knew Christ, and all the people in the audience know Christ that are attending. There's crying, there's people that are definitely upset, and missing their loved one, of course. But usually it's like, they're in heaven. We're going to see him again. It's fine. Then you go to a funeral of someone who was not, really well that they were not a believer. And the people that are there are very upset, because they don't have that understanding. And maybe that's, partly why we're only here for so long. Right? Why we have a finite existence is so that we can understand that, no, you need to rely on God from the beginning, right? As soon as possible. And when you go to people's funerals and you see, well, that's going to expose you to the fact and put right in front of you the fact that we're all temporal, right? We all have a beginning and an end. God knows all of our steps. And, hopefully he leads us through those steps to bring us to his grace and salvation through that. Okay. Okay. That brings up the second important word, the word that translates what Jesus said about being comforted in the Greek word parakaleo. Whew. It is made up of two Greek words, para, which means beside, and kaleo, the word meaning for the action of calling. Jesus says that those of us mourning are now lucky because we are ready to have God answer our call. and it is not an answer from afar. It is the right alongside of me return of my plea. It is the comfort that comes when I feel those arms around me, when I know the warmth of another's care. It is relief right here, right now. Jesus knows that this comfort has two critical elements. First, it is comfort found only by those who are at this moment open because of their agony. And secondly, it is a promise that reaches beyond the immediate. The same root word for comfort in this verse is used by John to describe the role of the Holy Spirit as the great comforter. Now let's look at a beatitude that seems... Okay, so what if the lucky ones are those who understand how to draw near to God when life seems so fragile? Let's look at a beatitude that seems to be just redundant. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Matthew 5:7. Okay, in this verse, we have a familiar opening pattern. Makarios, happy, be joyful. Jesus is making an announcement. This is not a conditional command. It is not a statement that says you should be merciful so that you will get mercy. This is not a variation of the golden rule. Jesus is announcing that those who are already practicing mercy are happy. Literally, the phrase means happy the merciful. There is an implied verb in the English translation, but the Greek made it clear that Jesus is proclaiming a statement of fact, not an invitation to action. Our English word of mercy is a word taken from legal context. We imagine a courtroom scene. Guilty person stands before a judge waiting to be sentenced. He falls to his knees and begs for mercy. He's asking the sentence he deserves to be set aside. For us, mercy is about removing punishment, but it didn't always have this kind of meaning. In Greek culture, mercy was not a moral or legal consideration. It was a psychological, emotional response. We are swept into the emotion of mercy when we come into contact with someone who's experiencing undeserved suffering. Something in us responds to the plight of another. We just can't help it. And this creates another problem in the Greek mind. Mercy is connected with fear. The fear that what has happened to this person who has aroused my feelings of mercy might also happen to me. Mercy is not a passion that is aroused when we see someone suffering because they deserve it. We don't feel sorry for them. Actions have consequences. If they are suffering because of a justified consequence, then that is right. No mercy is required. It is undeserved suffering that births mercy in our souls. And precisely because of it is undeserved, we fear it. Since there is no apparent reason for this tragedy, it could also happen to us. But Jesus quotes Psalms, and in Psalm 37, there's a very special Hebrew word that was translated into Greek as mercy. But this word really means something much bigger. The word is hesed. We could learn a lot about that word, but for now, let's just notice that Jesus says those who are undeserving of mercy are the happy ones, but this seems entirely backwards. We might understand mercy for the innocent, but how do we feel about mercy for the guilty? That doesn't seem fair. Another paradox. In the same verse, Jesus draws a conclusion. The connecting word is the Greek word hoti. We usually translate it as because. If I read the beatitude with because in the translation, then I might conclude that the reason for the happiness Jesus announces is due to the fact that these people will receive like kind action. That is, they will be rewarded for their mercy. Therefore, they are happy because they know that they're going to get what they need. They gave mercy to someone who didn't deserve it. Now they get mercy too. This would make a beatitude a self-fulfilling moral law, the practice of delayed gratification. These are very long from this guest speaker. Okay. Fortunately, there's another reading, hoti, after the word of emotion such as joy, pity, sorrow, or rejoicing. Can be translated to seeing that. That is to say, the first idea is built on the second, not the other way around. This little change makes all the difference. Now, Jesus' words do not say, happy are those who are willing to give up what is rightfully theirs, because they will be shown the same consideration later. Instead, Jesus says, happy are those who, paying the price of being merciful and understand that they stand in need of mercy too. I don't show mercy in order to be rewarded with mercy. I show mercy as a result of knowing why mercy is essential for me. It is the fact that I am a candidate for mercy that makes me willing to pay the price of mercy now. It is not my reward, it is my obligation. In other words, the paradox of mercy is that I must need it first before I can understand how important it is to give it to someone else. Okay. So now we have a journal your response. Here, applying the teaching in this in your own life, have you ever been in a position to offer mercy to someone who didn't deserve it? Do you respond out of empathy? Do you recognize yourself in the shoes of the other? Which way of thinking fits Jesus' words? What do you think God is asking of you? A lot of questions there. Now, one thing I know is something kind of this way. Something I may have done something wrong to someone, and without me knowing it. And in the group that we were in at the time, somebody was saying that I was, didn't want to get a picture with them, didn't want to do something with them, kind of ignored them a little bit, and I found out about that, and I just said, wait. I didn't say, why are you picking on me? You're nobody. I don't want to deal with you, kind of thing. I turned it completely around. I just overly apologized, right? Completely said, I am so sorry. Things were busy, but that's not an excuse. Next time we get together and we all see each other, please come up to me. Please get a picture with me. Please do all of these, these things. Sit down, talk with me. All those things, whatever they needed, to do. And then, so that all happened, and then that person then turned around and became like my biggest advocate. Like, if anybody said anything in this, kind of group that, was about me or anything, or said they didn't know like what my motivation or anything was, in things, they would just come right out and say, no, he's a great guy. He's awesome. He does, all this stuff, and he went out of his way for me. He, showed me, kindness, and, where this person was down and upset, I showed her mercy. I showed her kindness. I showed her, understanding, all of these things, right? I didn't have to, but I understand that I'm a person, and sometimes I need people, to understand me, understand what I'm doing, understand that, maybe I need something, from somebody at some point, in that same way. So it really kind of fits with, how Christ wants us to act with each other people, showing that love and care, consistently with everybody else, knowing that we also need love and care, and we can get that from God, but we can also get that from other people. Okay. So these are pretty long, but there we go. That's number 27. Whew. Moving right along. So I'm going to keep doing these things, of course. And if you have any questions, comments, or anything about what we're talking about, please feel free to comment down below, and I will respond. And again, thanks for watching. God bless.